You're good. You're good. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our NorthStar community service. For you that are online, we welcome all of you, and glad that you're joining us, and of course, anybody here as well. So it's always exciting to be here, and we just love talking about recovery and the journey of recovery. That's difficult, but it certainly is worth doing. So real fast about NorthStar again. So we believe in that Jesus is our higher power. We love AA. We love the 12 steps. And what we really focus on, the themes for NorthStar that often we look at are looking at what is it that created addiction in our lives? Why is it that we became addicted? Why do some people not become addicted? Why do some others become addicted? And of course, the real answer is by grace of God. I'm not addicted to substances, but for other people, they are. It just depends on what's going on. But what we really look at is our childhood. And we look at how our childhoods affect us in our adulthood. And that's where I think a lot of the addiction comes from. For many of us, we were traumatized or abandoned, both of which created lots of self-doubt, lots of self-loathing, lots of just our foundation was taken from us when we live in those kind of environments. So what we try to do is deliver the grace, deliver God's grace, the message of his grace and how much he loves us. And again, I'll just keep saying this over and over again. There's nothing you can do that's too much for God not to forgive us. And I know it's hard for us to understand that. And again, like I said, unfortunately for many of us, we've had some tough religious experiences where we've been judged. Maybe some people haven't been as nice as they should have been to us. But the fact is, we can overcome. That's the beauty, is when, always make sure I tell people when we talk about childhood trauma and abandonment, I'm not giving you an excuse to continue to be addicted. I'm just helping you try to realize what's driving it so you can do something about it. But at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to recover. It's our job to make our lives become what they need to be in living in an unaddicted way of living, which is so destructive. So we talk about addictive thinking a lot in here, and so the one we're going to talk about today is dealing with conflict. Because as we know, when we're in our addictive thinking and our addictive behaviors, let's be honest, we aren't at our best. And I'm being kind when I say that. But I always kid about, there's no one more stressed than an addict, right? And addicts have the most stress of everybody in the whole world. But the fact is, what we never usually see is that we're causing most of it, right? And so we're going to look at conflict a little bit today. But I've been using Isaiah 6. I'm going to continue to use this again today. So this is Isaiah speaking to God after God has delivered a very strong and difficult message to him. But I think for us, this is a great message about recovery, and I think most of us would understand this. So Isaiah is speaking here, and he goes, "Astonished, I said, and Master, how long is this to go on?" He said, "Until the cities are emptied out, not a soul left in the cities. Houses empty of people, countryside empty of people, until I, God, get rid of everyone, sending them off, the land totally empty." Doesn't that sound like fun? So again, Isaiah had been talking to the Israelites about their behavior, what they were doing, and of course, just as we would do, we weren't listening very good, and God became more and more upset with them. And think about us as addicts. We use. We actually believe it's not harming anyone. It's not harming ourselves. I don't know why everybody's being so judgmental. I'm just doing this or that, and I know people worse than me, and all the things we say. So then God's not done yet. Then he says, "And even if some should survive, say a tenth, the devastation will start up again." Wow, doesn't that sound like fun? "The country will look like pine and oak forest with every tree cut down." How's that? Sound pretty fun? But as in us in recovery, we know that if we hold on to a tenth, we're going to relapse. If we can just hang on to this or that, I mean, how many people do we know, and I'm looking at all of us too, is how many of us know that we say, well, I was a cocaine addict, but now I just smoke weed every day, right? Well, guess what? That's a tenth. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to relapse again. Or if you say, well, I need to get on Facebook just a little bit at a time to see what's going on, but I'm not going to be 7 hours on there like I was, right? Or I didn't order Amazon for 5 days this week, right? You get the point. Well, guess what happens? We relapse because we haven't completely given up everything. But here's the beauty. God ends this with, "Every tree is stump, a huge field of stumps, but there's a holy seed in those stumps." And for me, that's God's grace. That's God's love. Actually, the intention here is that this is Jesus Christ he's talking about. So we know this in recovery. Devastation is the only way we recover. We were talking about that today in our Sunday school class about, well, maybe some people just don't need to hit rock bottom to recover. I've never seen it. I wish there was. I really wish, because I'm going to tell you, some of the people that I talk to, their rock bottoms are pretty darn deep, right? But the fact is, we have to lose almost everything to really recover. And I wish it wasn't like that, but it really is. But one of the ways I think we can help reduce the rock bottom is when we start to understand about our childhood, about how that's affected us, about how we're carrying trauma with us. PTSD is a very difficult and confusing condition in our lives. When you have post-traumatic stress, I always tell people, what you got to remember about PTSD is that good people get PTSD. I mean, you're not, if you're a raging sociopath, you're never going to have PTSD because you don't care enough about people to care. But when you're a good and decent person and trauma enters your life, that's a different subject. And because you're a good and decent person, it bothers you. It traumatizes you. And the other part we oftentimes forget about is the abandonment piece. I know people who will say, well, I didn't have any trauma in my childhood, but we had abandonment. Our parents didn't have time for us, or our parents labeled us critically all the time, or worse, our parents flipped the script on us, and they made us responsible for their happiness. That's abandonment. And people, we're all people. So as parents, I'm a parent, certainly make mistakes. I certainly made mistakes throughout my life as a parent. But the fact is, we all have something, and that's the idea here. So we're going to jump to Isaiah 40 now, and this is there was this great speaker, this great orator, this great prophet that had such great language and conveying of God's purpose and all, and we don't know who he is. We don't know who this person is. We don't have any idea his name or anything. But this is somebody wrote. So, who is like me? This is God talking again. So, who is like me? Who holds a candle to me, says the Holy. Look at the night skies. What do you think made all this? Who do you think made all this? Who marches this army of stars out each night, counts them off, calls each by name, so magnificent, so powerful, and never overlooks a single one. So why in the world am I reading this after the other? Well, the point is that God knows what he's doing, and he has very strong attention to detail in a very loving way. Why would you ever complain, O Jacob, or whine, Israel, saying, God has lost track of me. He doesn't care what happens to me. When we become addicted, when our hurts, habits, and hang-ups take over, we definitely have that one going. Don't you know anything? Haven't you been listening? God doesn't come and go. God lasts. He's creator of all you can see or imagine. He doesn't get tired out, doesn't pause to catch his breath, and he knows everything inside and out. Now, for us that are struggling with the hurts, habits, and hang-ups, that's kind of a threatening statement right there, right? I don't know if I want God knowing all the things I'm doing inside and out. But I hope what you'll see is go to the glass half full here and see what he's saying is, I love you that much. I know what you're doing. I know what your heart is. I know how you feel, and I love you. That's what we need to hear. Not, oh my gosh, he's going to catch me in all my addictive behaviors. That's not what we're saying here. It's about love. And you probably have heard this, and this is the Message version, but he energizes those who get tired, gives fresh strength to dropouts. I think we could say us that are overachieving in hurts, habits, and hang-ups, we would probably consider dropouts. For even young people tire and drop out, young folk in their prime stumble and fall. But those who wait upon God gets fresh strength. They spread their wings and soar like eagles. They run and don't get tired. They walk and don't lag behind. So you go from, I'm going to devastate your life. I'm going to take everything from you. If you try to hang on to 10% of it, I'm going to take that too, because it's the only way you're going to get better. And then you can whine and complain about it. You can gripe about it, and you can do all those things. But the reason I do it is because I love you. I know everything about you, and I love you that much. That's God talking. And then he says, you know what? I'm going to be there for you. And if you'll realize that, you can have a life you never dreamt of. We like to call it a rich, full, meaningful life. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So addictive thinking, however, has a different agenda. So addictive thinking's job is to say, I don't know what you're going to do today, but here's what we are going to know. We're going to do something to act out our hurts, habits, and hang-ups. We're going to do something. That might be, we may drink. We may get online for a couple hours. We may go out and hang with disruptive people. But the fact is, we're going to keep that going. That's what we're going to do. And the only way we cannot do that is we need to lose a lot to get to there. But the fact is, it's not like we're doing cartwheels already. And abandonment and trauma are the common denominator in most people who are addicted. I know people argue with me about that, so I try to say out the either or. I don't say everyone, I'll just say a vast majority of people who are addicted have some very compelling and sad childhood stories that I'm sorry that we've had to face. So when we discuss trauma and abandonment, again, we're not using it for excuse making. That's not at all what we're doing here. We're trying to make you aware so that you can overcome these things and become that person that you want to be. So when we go through trauma and abandonment, we tend to do a couple things. One is, as we become adults, one is that we conflict becomes it becomes a big issue for us, and we will do a couple things here. One is we overreact. I mean, I've known guys who they just love to fight. They're out there looking for fighting. They just love it. If that opportunity comes up, they're there. They're ready to go, right? Then you got others of us who freeze and completely become devoid of conflict because we don't believe in ourselves, we don't love ourselves. I mean, I know some people who are utterly incapable of using the word no. They cannot do it, right? And that's because of how we feel about ourselves. And so we have to figure out ways to become aware of how our feelings about ourselves create the problems we have with conflict. The problem with abandonment and trauma is that it creates such a low self-image in ourselves. It robs us that we can be in charge of our lives. The technical word is that we lose the thought of the feelings of agency, that we have our dreams, we have our goals, whatever it is. When we're traumatized and abandoned, we lose that belief system. We don't believe we're not in charge of our lives. We're victims to whatever happens. And addictive thinking just keeps us locked down in that haunting, troubled stuff that we've faced in our past. And it's so strong that it's a physiological reaction. So it isn't like you're crazy here. It's not like but that's what we do because of how we feel about ourselves. We're going to blame ourselves for everything, when the fact is that this is a physiological reaction, and it makes it hard for us to overcome that without support. And I don't know how many of you can relate to feeling helpless, to feeling like you're not in charge of anything. And so many of us, what we talk about is, how we just felt different when we were children. We felt different from others around us. We felt kind of in isolation. We worked really hard to let people maybe know us and see our smiling face or our angry face, whatever it was. But the point was, we didn't let people get close to us because there was something wrong with us, because we were different. Now, the case is, I would guess if you talk most people, they probably thought that too, but we really did see that. And in cases where we've experienced a lot of abandonment, and when I talk about abandonment, it's your parents may not have been mean to you in the big sense, like they didn't punch you in the face, they didn't punch holes in the wall beside you, they didn't throw you. It's more about they flip the script again on you and ask you to take care of their needs. It's a really unfair way to go. And of course, you never won, because you're always, how many of you ever heard a parent say, "You're the reason my life is so awful, it's because of you be my kid." Those are the kind of quotes that are very hurtful and harmful and create a lot of problems. And we always have to remember, as kids, we don't say to ourselves, "You know what? My parents, they got issues, and their ACE scores are probably high, and they need to work on this." That's not what we do. As kids, what do? We say, "It's me. I'm the problem. If I was a better kid, my mom wouldn't be so mean to me. If I was different, maybe my dad would love me more." Those are what we create in our minds. That destroys us in our foundation. But it's not true. It's not true, but boy, it feels true. And I know I talk about the ACE a lot, but it's such a telling survey. About 28% of the United States population in their samples scored 0. So that means 72% scored 1 or above. The fact is that, and I know us in NorthStar are always like, yeah, okay, someone scored 0. They're just lying about their lives, right? But there are people out there that actually have 0 scores. But what's important is when you start getting up to 4, there's 10 questions. When you get up to the 4, 5, 6, and above, you're dealing with childhood stuff that's tough. And I always like to tell the statistic that's so telling is that if you haven't resolved your life and haven't worked on it, if you score 6 or more, you're going to die on average 20 years younger than someone who scores a 0 on the ACE score. So I just don't know what else I can say to convince you need to take care of the CPTSD and the PTSD in your lives, because it's so compelling and it's so destructive. I think about relatives that I've had in my family who have died young because their ACE scores were high. They were violent. They lived recklessly. They abused substances. They were in horrible relationships. I can go on and on, right? That's what happens when you have high ACE scores. You don't go out and find healthy people. You go out and find unhealthy people. So for an addict, 2 + 2 = 4, and I'm okay with that, right? For an addict, 2 + 2 = 4, and I can't stand that. I cannot stand the reality of my life. I cannot stand the internal pain that I feel all the time. And so addictive thinking kicks in and says, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to keep you safe. I'm going to be wildly dysfunctional, and I'm going to lie, and I'm going to do all those things. I'm going to keep you using, because you know what? Using is less painful than dealing with my pain. So I say this, always like every NorthStar, I always like to use this just as being kind of funny, but I'll just say it again. Addictive thinking doesn't work. Just so, in case anybody's missing the point here, it doesn't work. It's invalid thinking that creates destructive behavior is what it is. So if we look at addiction as habitual behavior to avoid pain, addictive thinking makes sense, because that's what it's doing. It's helping us not to feel pain. It's telling us to avoid pain at all costs because it's not worth it. But for us that are in recovery, we know it's not true. We know that it is worth facing your pain. It's awful. It isn't fun, but it's worth it in the long run. And I always quote Russell Brand's quote about addiction starts with pain, recovery starts with pain. Actually, addiction ends with pain. Our problem is we have so much pain, so much trauma, so much abandonment, so much loathing about ourselves, so much self-hatred, so much of all that, it makes sense why we don't want to deal with it. It really does. The problem is that, as we know, you wouldn't be here listening to me right now if you weren't going through some stuff. So addictive thinking's purpose is to keep us from intolerable, unacceptable, and catastrophic awareness. That's really what it does. People come to me and they'll say, I want to get healthier, I want to recover, and I go, you really do? I do. I said, well, you better buckle up your seatbelt because it's going to be painful. And it doesn't make sense when you hear that at first, because you're going, what could be painful about getting healthier, right? But guess what you got to do? You have spent your entire life denying how you feel. You have spent your entire life hiding from the painful memories. You have spent your entire life avoiding. And now someone like me is saying to you, guess what? Can't do that anymore. That's pretty tough. And so with addictive thinking, what happens is that we became oblivious. We become oblivious to reality. And if we go abstinent, if we actually stop, which is the only way you're going to get better, is the only way, I always tell people, I hate to tell you, but the only way you're going to get better is you got to stop doing what you're doing. Right? That's pretty tough. See, so when you get to step one, what you in the 12 steps is basically you say, I have now discovered that there's something in my life that I am powerless over, and it's made my life become unmanageable. You know how hard it is to go from pre-step one to step one? Because think of all the years we have spent putting our faith in substances, compulsive behaviors, people to avoid our pain, which all we've done is created more pain. And then we say, oh, guess what? You can't do it anymore. So not only do you have to quit doing it, you have to accept the fact that the things you were doing were causing you lots of harm. So alcohol at first actually worked pretty well. I felt better. People liked me better. I was funnier. Whatever it was, it did for me. But then it became where I had to have it. And so now I'm saying to you, you have to live with abstinence now. You cannot use it anymore. That's pretty hard to do because our brains haven't done that in a long time. The only way we can do that is we have to have healthy people around us. Which the problem with that is a lot of us never have ever been around healthy people. A lot of us come from families that are so dysfunctional and crazy, you don't know what that means. So I'm going to get the conflict here. So here's the deal. So with addicts, we're always in conflict. When we're in our deepest parts of hurts, habits, and hang-ups, we are the greatest no-win scenario people I've ever seen in my life. We cannot not create issues. We cannot, our families don't know what to do. Our families enable a lot of times. Our families are in conflict with us. They're mad at us all the time because, well, I mean, I didn't steal all the money, right? I just needed a little bit every day, right? But it isn't that we have more conflict than others. We think we do. It's just that our addictive thinking messes up lots of things, and we generate lots of conflict in no-win scenarios. Our overwhelming conflict is not responsible for addiction. Rather, it is our distorted perceptions that make reality unacceptable. When you loathe yourself, when you hate yourself, when you doubt yourself, when you cannot stand to look in the mirror, it's kind of hard to not have conflict in your life because you're going to create lots of it. I mean, think about it. How many of us understand this, that our self-image, we just feel so inadequate. We just think that, sometimes I've told people, it isn't that I think I'm so bad, I just think everybody else has got their act together better than me, right? But a lot of times, I've heard lots of people tell me, when I was acting out, when I was in my depths and my hurts, habits, and hang-ups, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I could not look at me. Or I've had other people say, I looked in the mirror, but I didn't know who I was looking at. I didn't recognize that person because I was so far removed from who I really was. So I live in terror. I have no confidence. I need external validation. I see myself as fake, as a fraud, stupid. Sometimes I see it's always my fault. Sometimes it's everyone else's fault. But the fact is, we're pretty messed up on this. Oftentimes we like to look like we live with bravado. I need no one. I'm my own person. I don't need anybody telling me what to do. I don't need some group telling me what to do or not do. And I don't need to hear all their quotes and blah, blah, blah. And go to this meetings, a whole bunch of old people in there, all that stuff, right? That's all just language for I'm scared and I don't want people to see what I'm doing. So you can see how this might lead to conflict. And for us that I think most of us have some form of PTSD or complex PTSD, what are the primary symptoms of PTSD? Agitation and broken relationships. I don't know about you, but that might create conflict, right? How many of us get agitated when we get around a group of people? We just start going, I can't do this anymore. Or, it's even if you know them. I've had people with PTSD talk about how a bunch of kids get around. They start getting agitated. They just can't take it, right? I think that's going to create conflict, don't you? And, of course, when we escape into our hurts, habits, and hang-ups, that's going to create all sorts of problems, right? Because one of the problems is when we get addicted in our addictive thinking, we isolate from people. So we're not building the good side, and all people get are the dark side. That's what makes conflict so hard. So we take away the grace and forgiveness of others sometimes just because we're all they see from us is our problems and the messes we make. So what's important here is we have to understand how our view of ourself is what's so destructive. So I'll use an example of how our perceptions are incorrect. So I was working for a large organization. I was an internal consultant for them, and I thought I made a major mistake. I thought I mixed up results and I delivered the wrong results to the wrong team. Well, so one team got a pretty good rating on what they were doing. The other team got very low rating. So if I'd mixed this up, that might be a problem, right? I lived with this for 2 weeks, trying to, believing that I'd done it, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do because I knew if I owned up to it, I was going to get fired probably, or at least going to be yelled and screamed at a whole bunch. And, of course, I was feeling guilty about how both these teams had been, affected in pretty big ways, all right? So what do you think for 2 weeks I thought about myself? Do you think I was saying, Craig, you are a genius, good job, buddy? Do you think I was saying, oh, my gosh, you're so smart and you never make mistakes, and it's okay if you do. You're a good person. Do you think that's what I was saying? I was talking about how stupid I was, how I can't be trusted. You go on and on, right? A very addictive thinking kind of statements, right? Loathing, all that stuff. Well, the good news was, out of 2 weeks, I figured out that I actually had done it right. The right teams got the right results. So I don't get caught up in what I did. What I want you to hear is that my perceptions about myself were not true. I was not the stupidest person on the planet. I was not this unethical jerk. I was not this lying. Do you see what I'm saying? But I believed that for a couple weeks, even more so about myself. Well, that's what we do. That's how we live all the time when we're addictive. We believe that about ourselves the whole time, and it's not true. One of the things we used to do at NorthStar, it's just so funny to hear how we would get so put out by it, but we used to do the grandmother exercise where, what would your doting, loving grandmother say about you when you were 5 years old? He's the smartest boy I've ever seen. He's so funny, and right? We hate that exercise. Now, if I said, tell me all the bad things about yourself, we'll get paper out and we'll just start right. We'll have a list of 30 in 4 seconds. But I say, all right, tell me the good stuff about yourself. It's like, I don't want to think about it. Do you hear how wrong this is? That's what kills us with addictive thinking. So when I thought I'd messed up, when the fact is I really hadn't, so I really didn't change who I was, but it's certainly my perceptions about me were changed, all for much darker. That's what we live with. That's why conflict becomes so hard for us. You ever heard of this thing called negative attribution? When I'm at my worst, guess what I do? Do you think I look at all of you and say, oh, you're so good and you make such great decisions and you're so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. No, I put negative attribution to everything, right? So I always like to use this as an excuse. This is kind of a funny one. So I'm out driving my car and someone cuts me off, right? So do you think I go, you know what, that's okay. They probably having a bad day. They probably weren't, they're busy, whatever. You think is that what I say? No. I go, those selfish people, all they do is care about themselves. They were probably texting. They just cut me off, didn't even care, right? And I won't say the other things I say, right? Or you say. Let me be honest here. Or what you say, right? So the next day after that, I'm driving, and I actually cut someone off. What do I say? Oh, my gosh, I feel so bad about it. I didn't mean to do that. I don't know what I was thinking, right? Do you hear the difference? If someone else did it to me, I'm like, they don't care, they're selfish, they're jerks, they're blah, blah, blah. I do it, I feel bad, and I feel apologetic, right? Probably that's what they're feeling when they cut. I know, you can argue. There are some that don't care. But the fact is, most people that cut you off, they probably weren't trying to do that. That wasn't they didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to see how many people I can cut off today. I'm going to see how many people I can torque today while driving. That's probably not what they were saying. But you see how destructive this is? I've told some addicts before, I said, if someone gave you $1 million right now, you'd be looking for ulterior motives, and you'd be complaining because it wasn't in the right currency. You want $1,000 bills instead of $500 bills. That's what happens to us. We become so negative and so destructive in how we see ourselves, and we look for and you know how it is, we look for the worst in ourselves, so guess what? We do negative attribution, and everybody's up to something, right? Everybody's up to doing something. They want to hurt us. So the problem is we have to find ways to connect in right ways, in healthy ways. And the problem is, for a lot of us, we don't even know what that means. There's people I know who, prior to NorthStar, could tell me they really never had anyone in their life they could trust. Sometimes the lucky ones have had that grandmother or somebody but it wasn't their immediate family. So then I say to you, you need to connect with people. You need to not be so angry about yourself. And they're like, okay. Even the ones that are motivated are like, maybe true, but I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And the thought of having a rich, full, meaningful life is like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's going to happen. But you know what? It can happen, but it's complicated, and it takes effort. The fact is, you are wonderfully and miraculously made. And until you can see that, you're going to have lots of conflict. Lots of people out there, right? How many of us have ever said, I've heard this one, how many said, you know, the Hanover County Sheriff's Department, they're picking on me. They stop me all the time. Obviously, they're picking on me. Or how about the kids at school go, my teacher doesn't like me, and I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm like, yeah, right, right? Or my family's always put out with me. All that stuff. But when you loathe yourself, you assume abandonment. Things aren't going to work out for you. That's what you assume. But there are ways that live healthier. There are ways that reduce your conflict. And I think one of the big ones is the either or black and white, however you want to word it, thinking. It's like everyone out there is out to get me. You can't trust anybody anymore. There's no one out there that cares about me. Do you hear the words? When you hear yourself uttering the words, absolute terms like everybody, everyone, no one, always, you're in trouble. Because it's not true. It's not true. I'll have people say to me, everyone's out there. I always go, everyone? Well, okay, not everyone, but, right? So that's one. To reduce conflict, we have to get rid of the either or, black and white thinking. Because you know what? We're all flawed. We all have our mistakes. We also love some pretty good people too. So one of the things I always tell, so it kind of runs into the next one, is we have to overcome perfectionism. Perfectionism is such a wonderful way to hate ourselves. It works so well, and we just love doing it. And then if we want external validation with that, we're going to really do well with this one. And so I think to myself, if I'm not perfect all the time, people aren't going to love me. If I don't do everything right all the time, if I dare to make a mistake, I will be rejected. How does that sound for fun? So what am I going to do? I'm going to go out and just hit them first before they can get me. I'll create the conflict and take care of it, and I'll show them a thing or two. Yeah, that worked well for you, right? So absolute thinking kills us, and perfectionism just heaps on more trouble. Because the problem with, if you think about perfectionism, the biggest problem with perfectionism is it's a gift that just keeps on giving. I hate to break it to you, but none of you are perfect. I wish you were, but you're not. So you're always going to be failing. And which leads to the other one that we talked about is not everyone is bad, and they are not all out to get you. I know. I take my cars to a place that I trust because you know what? They have proven they're not out to get me. They don't take me every time I go. They don't steal from me. They don't make up stuff. There's people out there actually are honest. Crazy, isn't it? But when I'm addicted, that's not how I see the world. I see everybody's out to get me. And the problem is because I'm misbehaving is really what it's about. The other thing we got to do is we got to live with intentional gratitude. So when we say again that God knows everything, if we have gratitude, we are, thank you, God, that I'm so important, that you love me that much, you know what's going on in my life. Or we can say, oh my gosh, I better start hiding better because I don't want God to know what I'm doing. Which one are you going to choose? Great intentional gratitude. We can see God working in our lives. When we're not living with intentional gratitude, we're not going to see that. All we're going to see is judgment. And I hope that somewhere, maybe I will give you a black and white here, is that God loves you. God loves you. There's nothing you can do about it. You can run from him. You can curse him. You can do all those things. God loves you. And then the way to recover really is safety. The lack of safety in our childhood is what creates so much of our problems. So we have to create safety in our adulthood, and that's really hard to do. But that's what groups are for. AA, Al-Anon, you name it. So many that they're safe because they're not there. They're not selling you anything. They're not trying to get you to. If the right ones at least are there for you to show you how to be clean and sober and how to see the things you do. Of course, I'm biased. I think NorthStar, we do an awesome job of helping us become aware. But you can come in. We've had people come in who have been drinking. We still love them. We have people who have relapsed. We don't care. Come back. We're safe. We're not selling you anything. We're not forcing anything on you. We just want you to get clean and sober. We want what's best for you. So for you out there that are out there fighting and feuding and miserable and hating yourself and probably most people around you and see everybody as bad, I challenge you to at least try to get somewhere. Try a group somewhere. Give you a chance to recover. So basically, to conclude today is our conflicts are usually based on our self-loathing, our self-hatred. And here's what I hope you heard. I'll say it again. That is not real. It is not true. I don't care what you've done. I've known some people in recovery who've done some pretty awful things, but they're recovered. They get rid of the shame. They're able to live with it and realize that they can't have a rich, full, meaningful life. So Matthew 10 says, what's the price of a pet canary? Some loose change, right? And God cares what happens to it even more than you do. He pays even greater attention to you, down to the last detail, even numbering the hairs on your head. So don't be intimidated by all this. You're worth more than 1,000,000 canaries. So I hope you'll leave today realizing you are worth more than 1,000,000 canaries. How's that? I don't know what a canary is worth, but it sounds like a lot of money to me. The fact is, you're not so bad. And that's what we got to hear, because then we can connect. So we always close our meetings with the prayer of serenity. Again, for you guys that are local, we have our meetings on Wednesday nights at 6:30, Friday nights at 6:30, Sunday morning at 9:30, and of course 11:15, sorry. If you ever need to get a hold of me, you can call me at 804-746-5081. You can email me at csimpson@wgva.church. I would love to hear from you. If you're here locally, maybe you come see us. So we always close with a prayer of serenity, so let's go ahead and do that. And I thank all of you for joining today. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. Taking, as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that Jesus will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and the next. Amen. So again, thank you for joining today.